Good morning. It's Saturday, May 1st here from worldwide headquarters of Bierkergaard, Columbia, Pennsylvania, which is a combination of Columbia and Mountville. Columbia's a little rough, so I like the throw a dash of Mountville in there to make it a little bit more, a little more middle class, I suppose. So anyway, um, today I'm going to get a discussion about the history of beer in my family. My last name is Bierker. It sounds very German. I don't know if I talked about this previously, but it's actually, according to family history, lore, rumor, uh, Bierker is actually a Germanized either Norwegian or Swedish name. And it has something perhaps to do with the schisms in Europe and some wars and perhaps between the Catholics and the Lutherans, etc., etc. But my name sounds very German. The ironic thing is, if you go to Germany, as my dad used to work in Germany for a while when I was a teenager. He also worked in Spain, but living in Germany, there's very few Bierkers. Any Bierker that's out there, we're related to for the most part. There might be an exception here or there. So what sounds like the prototypical German name is actually not German very much. So that's the irony there. But Bierker. So that's where the name Bierkergaard comes from. My grandfather on my dad's side was born, I think, before the turn of the century. He fought in World War One for Germany. His older brother was killed in the trenches, trench warfare. His older brother was a war hero. His name was Wolfgang, I think. My dad's middle name is Wolfgang. My grandfather's name was George. My dad's name is George. And thank you, Father, for not naming me George. That's just the name that's no longer popular. George Bush, I suppose, is the most common example, or George Foreman. Some combination thereof. But I wouldn't tell George Foreman that I didn't like his name because he'd probably punch me in the face. So George Bierker was his name. Um, he was trained to be an architectural draftsman, and it was a male occupation for sure. Germany was very traditional, as was America at that time, anyway. He immigrated to the United States after World War One. He was very proudly German, had no sympathies with Nazism, but also wouldn't back off of his German heritage at all. But he refused to join any organization that had any sympathy for Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. My family in Germany is from Bavaria, at least on my dad's side. I think my mom's side too, or my mom's German also, but it's more of a distant immigration back in the 1600s with the Mennonites. But on my dad's side, both his father and his mother were from Bavaria, which is southern Germany. It's very Catholic. Um, that's where lager beer pretty much has its stronghold. That's where Oktoberfest is held in Munich, of course. My grandfather immigrated to the United States after World War One. He met his wife, my grandmother, Oma, which is German for grandmother. Here in the United States, he was known as Opa, which is German for grandfather. So any of you of German heritage know that. That's an obvious thing, but you may not know that if you don't have German heritage. Um, so he immigrated after World War One. It's very hard to be German in America during World War II, as you might imagine. Not ethnically German, because there's a lot of German heritage in the United States, especially like in here in Pennsylvania and other places. My grandparents lived in New York City and in Queens. Um, but it was hard to be authentically German in World War II, as you might imagine. But on my grandfather's side, I lost my train of thought here previously. On my grandmother's side, Germany, they were communist. They weren't Nazis, but they were in opposition to Nazism. I'm not sure it's a whole lot better to be communist with what Stalin did in Russia and Soviet Union, starving out millions of people. He was less maybe anti-Semitic, of course, but that's kind of a both were tyrants, both were dictators, both were awful human beings, of course, and their followers. So my lineage on my dad's side is communist. I think my grandmother's brother when the first time he saw Americans in World War II, threw down his weapon and spent the rest of the war in North Carolina. So that's just a short synopsis of my family history there. But my grandfather was an architectural draftsman. One of his specialties was designing breweries because it's Germany, and that was his craft. Very, very detail oriented. One of his drawings of the brewing process is right here. Follow the index finger right there. I'm going to hopefully post a picture of it. But that's one of his drawings. We think it says it's not signed or anything, but it was found up at my dad's cabin. It used to belong to my grandparents, but the cabin, my grandfather had a bunch of his drawings stored away up there for some reason. Who knows why? But my grandfather kept them, and among those drawings are a lot of drawings of breweries, and they were his drawings, so I assume this one is his also. It just doesn't have the name of his company on there. The company he worked for in New York City, I think, had made some kind of liner for lagering tanks or brewing tanks or something, but they also, I think, did beyond that. But my grandfather loved his beer. Opa loved his beer. Boy, when they went to the 72 Olympics, which was marred by tragedy, of course, with the shooting of the Israeli athletes, my grandparents are back in Munich during that time, and they went to the Olympics, or they were there during the Olympics. But they brought back little tiny beer mugs that I still have to this day. Mine was a Paulaner or Lavator, I'm not sure. Just they gave all of us kids a little tiny mug, and it's 1972. I was 9 years old. My grandparents didn't put soda in that thing when they came over. I drank a little beer. So it's very culturally German to drink beer when you're younger. It's not considered appropriate in most circles to get sloshed, except during Oktoberfest. So, but my grandfather loved his beer. He drank a beer called Munich, which was made somewhere in the Midwest. I have a can of it over there. I don't think it was a particularly great beer. It was light lager. But that's the family history there on that. So I have it's kind of in my DNA to enjoy beer, to consider it part of my cultural heritage. I like the craft beer movement because it's very diverse. It has a lot of different styles. Light lager is what dominates the market. It still does. Craft beer is a very small part of the overall beer market in the United States. Corporations run the show. And it's a light lager, and it's not bad. It's not great. Here's my thoughts on the current beer situation with corporate America is that most of the beer is a light lager. They minimize ingredients to increase profit, so they use adjuncts like Budweiser uses rice. Other brewers use different sources of carbohydrates and starches. So it's light because it doesn't cost as much. If you pump it full of carbonation and you're light on the hop usage, which are very expensive. Hops are very expensive to grow and to purchase and to use, which makes IPAs more expensive, of course. And you don't use a lot of malt and you use adjuncts, you have a fairly inexpensive product that you can mass produce. And beer can be produced in a mass environment very easily. And the brewing process up here kind of is a more mass-oriented production. My friends and I like to brew. We brew 5 gallons at a time, though, and we don't generally brew lagers because they're a little bit harder to brew. They're a little bit less forgiving. That's one reason. Number 2, you need more advanced lagering equipment, which is fermenting the vert at a lower temperature, so you need some refrigeration, or it has to be cool. In the old days, they used caves. So if you ever visit Yangling's original brewery up in Pottsville, yeah, I think it's Pottsville. There's Pottstown and Pottsville, but in Pottsville, you go down to the caves, and that's where they used to lager the beers. It's cool down there. So my basement's actually fairly cool because I have a stream underneath my basement. So at times during the seasons, it can get cooler down there. So technically, I probably could lager a beer. But I prefer ales. They tend to be a little bit more flavorful, a little bit more forgiving, a little bit higher in alcohol, or a lot higher depending. And the styles I like IPAs, I like Belgians. I enjoy a combination beer that could either go into a lager kind of style or into an ale style, but it's a Hefeweizen. It's a wheat beer. So that can be a lager or what was called a Belgian wit. So it uses the same ingredients. It's basically just one of its components is wheat. So I enjoy Hefes a lot. I also enjoy Belgian wits a lot, and I actually brewed a Belgian wit last Saturday. And I use the term brew kind of loosely. If you can make a cake like Betty Crocker out of the box, add some eggs, stir in some water and some other ingredients, and turn on the oven and pull the cake out before it gets burnt. You can probably home brew. You just need some decent equipment. I think people try to go on the cheap to start with, and I don't recommend that. If you want to try home brewing, try to find somebody that's already doing it that has some decent equipment. Because if you try to do it on your stove top, and you try to use your regular saucepan or larger pot, it's going to take you forever. It's not going to cool down quickly. It's probably not going to be super sterile because of it, just the heat element. Whatever. There's a lot that can go wrong if you're a novice brewer and you don't have the right equipment, and it can turn you off to wanting to be a home brewer because it's like, well, this is stupid. Why would I spend all this time and create all this mess, and then get a product that might not be as good as what I can buy at the store? So brew with somebody that knows what they're doing, and it's not that hard, but they do need better equipment. Things like a vert chiller are super, super important. If you try to cool your beer any other way, you'll go crazy. It's a stupid way of doing it, unless you live in Alaska and you're using the winter to cool your beer and it's 2 degrees outside or 20 below. You can chill your beer pretty quickly in that environment, but not as quickly as you think. So get a vert chiller, or as you continue to brew, all stainless. I use all stainless. Stainless doesn't have a lot of soul, but it's very clean. It's easy to clean. I don't like plastic. Plastic is porous to a degree, and it retains flavors. You can clean plastic if you use the right agents, but I don't like plastic in general. I try to avoid using plastic with everything, not just brewing, but anything that involves heat. I mean, it's fine at room temperature, but there's toxins in plastic. So stainless is my go-to. So I have all stainless equipment from start to finish. It's easy to clean. Like I said, it doesn't have a lot of soul, so you can get more flavors like if you use wood or whatever, but that's beyond like what most home brewers would do, like wooden barrels and things like that. A turkey stand, stainless steel pot, a temperature gauge that's reliable. I like a bottling tree, so after you clean your bottles off, you can turn them upside down, they dry easier. A vert chiller made out of copper. A capper, you can get a decent capper. You can also get a cheap one. I have a cheap one, it's fine, it works fine. And then you're good. So if you're thinking about getting into home brewing, you're interested in learning more about it, there's obviously a ton of YouTube videos. It's not that hard, but join up with somebody that's already done it a few times, and you'll get a better experience, and you'll get a better sense if you like it or not, rather than trying to do something at home with inappropriate equipment or like equipment that isn't great and this getting turned off from it. But I wouldn't recommend that you go heavy and buy a ton of equipment to start with, because you might not like it. It just may not be your thing, and it has nothing to do with the equipment. So I think it's probably good to just do it a couple times with somebody else who's already into it, that it's kind of a holding pattern. They're into doing it and they've done it for a while. I've been brewing probably for about 12 years. 12 or 13 years. I'm not heavy duty. I do 1 or 2 probably a year. But the kind of beers I do are either hard to find in the marketplace, or doing it at home actually has some value, because the kits are maybe like $50. And if I do like an Imperial IPA, I get 2 cases out of it. That's $25 a case for a beer that's about 9% ABV. That's a good deal. I mean, there's some sweat equity there. It's not a bargain, but it's not like I'm out there killing myself for 5 hours to make something that's twice as expensive to do myself than just buy it off the shelf. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. The Belgian wit, I just like summer beers. Yangling for a while was putting out a summer wheat that I loved. Some people didn't like it, but I thought it was great. It was just basically a less expensive version of Blue Moon, which I'm fine with. Blue Moon, made by Miller Coors, I think. I know Coors is involved. I think it's Molson Coors and Miller Coors. I'm not against mass-produced beer. I'm just not into like beer that doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. If I want to drink seltzer, I'll drink seltzer. If I want to add alcohol to seltzer, I'll do that. It's a lot cheaper than buying it at the store with alcohol in it. So Budweiser and Miller and Coors and all these mainstream beers are basically just seltzer. They're just a dash of hops, a little bit of malt, a lot of sugar, fermentable sugars, and you have a beer that has 4% alcohol or whatever. And it's very sessionable. So if it's super hot outside and you're out there mowing the grass and you want to crack a beer after you're done, a Budweiser's fine. It'll taste good. It won't taste particularly great in a lot of other situations if it's super cold outside, or if you're sitting by the fireplace, or sitting close to a campfire outside after a hard day of work. I don't think it really satisfies in the deepest sense because it doesn't. There's not much there. It's like eating potato chips. It'd be better to eat something more substantial. So that's kind of my gist on beer. Next, I'll try to do these on Saturday. I'm not making any promises this stuff is going to be polished, man. It ain't. Um, I'm just going to try to do these on Saturday and post them. If people watch them, great. If they don't, they don't. It's kind of tongue in cheek. I had posted on Facebook last week the rise of Bierkergaard. I mean, that's just a joke. Whatever. I'm just being goofy. I have no illusions here. But if you like to learn about craft beer, if you like beer in general, I also love coffee. I also love travel. I also love books. I love writing. I love ethnic food. So I'm not going to just keep this to beer alone, but beer is going to kind of be the entryway into Bierkergaard, and beer is going to be at least a big part of it. But I absolutely love coffee, so I could talk about coffee forever, but I won't bore you today. And we'll just take it from here. Have a good Saturday, or whenever you watch this. Have a good Monday.